Dad's Entertainment Street Performer to Las Vegas Star Part 2.
What would you say to independent business owners, self-employed people in the creative industries, in entertainment industries, are the benefits of actually writing a book? Because it's a big thing to actually do it, and you know, there's not money at the end of the end of it, if you like. So, but what have been the benefits to you in actually, you know, writing this beautiful book that you've written?
Thank you, Tony. I think incredible benefits, because it really incredible that I didn't know when I wrote it. I wrote it just because I had to write it. I had the inspiration to write it. It wasn't to make money. It wasn't really for anything. I just had to do it. However, before I wrote this book, I never did any marketing ever, because I didn't do any marketing for my magic show, because I was always really scared that if I told you to come to my magic show, it would be a crap show. So I'd put on a show and I wouldn't tell anyone about it. And I just never did any marketing because it was my personal show and I was worried it would go wrong or you wouldn't like it. The book is completely different. The book is a finished product. You know, it's not going to go wrong. Here it is. It's not going to, I put a plastic cover on it today because it's getting a bit shabby. I can't say it like that. It's not going to go wrong. This book is not going to go wrong. It's done. I know that people like it. I feel confident about it. It's got like 300
hundreds of 5-star reviews, haven't you?
People like it, and people buy it for their friends. So, and also I know it helps people. It's not personal. It's like me selling you a widget that I know it really works.
Yeah.
And so the benefits of that have been, because I know it really works and I really want to give it to you because it's a good thing to give to you. But it means that I've been doing podcasts and interviews and adverts because it's not about me. So it made it very much easier for me, and which ironically has really elevated my status in the magic world, because I've been on covers of magazines and I've written articles and I've got a daily blog, and because I'm midwifing the book into the world.
Yeah. So like, I mean, a way of thinking about that is it's the same for every service, frankly, or every creative thing, is that the book is actually making tangible, if you like, everything about you, really, and what you do very well.
Yeah. It's like a manual.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic.
This is how you do it.
Yeah. But a product like a book or a film or whatever is much easier to sell than the intangible of a magic performance, or you know, I'm a great musician, or whatever it happens to be. So no, I think that's fantastic.
It is. I mean, it's still not easy to sell. But you just have to keep, the thing is, as a speaker, it's really easy to sell, because once you've been talking about your life, then people are like, oh, I want to read the book. But it's just been this year. We haven't been.
Yeah, but don't you find that even these kind of things, that you get a little spike in your sales as a result of having done interviews?
So I've been doing Zoom calls with the Rotary audience that don't like you. I've had them, and the inner wheel of the Rotary, and speaking to all these people, and then, because they're only getting a snapshot, and you tell them that you went to Las Vegas, you told them that you heard a voice that told you to leave your husband, and you did. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then you get a spike, and it's brilliant fun, you know, talking about.
That was a real jaw stopper when I came to that in the book. That was amazing. And to him, yeah, absolutely. Like, that was a real shock. So I'm not going to ask you any questions about that at all, because but what it does show to me is that once you've actually visualized something, then nothing is going to get in the way of you achieving that vision, isn't it? It's a bit like a professional sports person, really. In many ways, is that, you know, they'll move team, they'll move, you know, because if they've decided they've only got a limited number of years to actually get to the top, and if they actually visualize what it'd be like to play for Real Madrid, for example, as the side that they actually have visualized playing for, then they will take the decisions that get them to achieve that vision, won't we? Which is what you did.
Yeah. So you have your vision in place, and then you go, okay, what step do I need? Yeah. And this was a thing again with the book, because of course this year I had no work at all, nothing. Everything got cancelled, as you can imagine. And in September, but I felt I ought to use the year to practice or whatever, but I didn't want to. And then in September, I thought, well, how can I use my time wisely? And I had this concept of spinning the book out to 1 million readers. But that is magical thinking. That's imaginative thinking.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay. Then I thought, all right, I need to commit to one daily action a day. What am I going to do daily? One action. Am I going to ring someone up and I'm going to do a blog? Am I going to, I don't know. So, and then I started to commit, and that, I love the phrase, take one step towards your dream and the universe will run towards you with open arms. Now, I'm all about this, but it's so, I have found it to be true.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
And that's my job. I'm a magician. If I don't believe in magic, who does?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do a little bit of name dropping at the moment, because I can't stop it really. So one of the things, as you know from one of my reviews, I think that I was absolutely intrigued by was another magician that is totally at the top of their profession, David Copperfield. Mm-hmm. And you can tell the story of actually what happened. But the reason I'm interested in telling the story of that evening, which really does show that you've got to the really top in your profession to be invited to this particular thing that actually happened, is the fact that in many ways you're very determined. This is my interpretation. You're very determined, and you do have this visualization, and you certainly believe that if you visualize and you imagine things, that that is the essential in terms of it all actually happening. But then there are these people like David Copperfield that you would actually think, well, they've got to the top in actually a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You tell us a little bit about David Copperfield, and something, because you were entering a male world where I've only had, the only reason I'm still in business is I've only had, as you know from my book, women business partners all the way through, if you like. And I haven't actually met a woman business partner that is how I imagine David Copperfield would be. Yeah. But I have met men in different forms of life that are like that. So there are many routes to get to the top, but just explain the incident about what David Copperfield invited you to and what actually happened.
Yes, and it does show the very difference, because David Copperfield is an extremely determined, focused, a man that never stops working, never stop. I knew his chief choreographer, and she would say that they would work all day long. They had like a break for 20 minutes to eat pizza, and then they'd work through the night. He's like doesn't stop. Yeah. And I stop a lot. As I told you, I'm like a fairy buzzing around the task. So, but this was in 2011, where basically the story was that I wanted a magic show that was really good. This was my big dream, and I couldn't seem to get there. And I remembered that there was the top of Vegas at the time were Siegfried and Roy. Oh, yeah. And they were these boys that come from Germany, and then they had worked, and then they became they were the people with the tigers and the lions in Vegas. Yeah. And I thought if I could only meet them, maybe some of their magic would rub off. And I mean, what a crazy idea, but this is sort of how I think. Yeah. And so I bought tickets to go to the Palladium to see them in the Palladium, but I only had tickets in the Gods, and the magic dust didn't get that far. So, and then I thought if I entered their competition in Las Vegas, they had the World Magic Awards. Then even if I'm rubbish, backstage they'll come and say hello to me, and maybe I can just rub against them, and I'll get my magic act. I mean, this is. I think my parents maybe read me too many fairy tales, but but this is what I did. Yeah. So I wrote to the organizer of the World Magic Awards and said, "Can I enter?" Thinking there would be about 50 people and no one would notice me. And then he came back and said, yes, you can have a place. We'll give you $500, which I was like, huh? And there's 7 other entrants, and you can have a place. And I looked at the 7 other entrants, and it was the champion of China, the champion of France, the champion of all the other country champions. Now, at the time, I was the British champion of the Magic Circle Magician of the Year, but I got by on comedy. Yeah. Anyway, so this is how I won it. This is Romany's method for winning something.
Yeah, great.
Right. Yeah. I looked at what the other winners looked like, and they all had a big check. I had a photograph with them in the middle holding a check with Siegfried and Roy on each side. There was maybe 3 of them. So I got these photographs and I photoshopped my face onto the winners' faces. And I put up these pictures around my studio. So I had a visual thing of me holding the check.
Wow.
And then my dog passed last year, but I had the dog Bongo. And I would walk him in the forest holding
named
my check.
After Ali Bongo for people that absolutely.
Holding my check, saying to the trees, I know, I can't believe it either, but I've won. The World Magic Awards in Las Vegas. And this is how I do magic, how I get things to happen. I manufacture the feeling that I have already. You have to feel as if it's already happened. I was like, incredulous. I was feeling incredulous. I've won this competition. Who would have known? And I carried on. But 2 weeks before the competition, and I practiced. I did practice. I got up every morning and I put on my costume and I practiced all day. I did do the work. But 2 weeks before the competition, I got a letter from the organizer saying, due to the hotel restrictions of the theatre, there's no fire. And 3 of my 6-minute competition act was fire. I was like, and he said, I understand if you want to come out of the competition. I was like, I can't. I've got to meet Siegfried and Roy. So I had to completely change my act from silent, I was into music, to talking. And short story long, because of that, I won the competition. Basically, I've got to tell you one other thing. I changed to an old routine. And when I got 2 volunteers out of the audience, one of the volunteers, an American guy who was quite obese, he fell down and looked like he was having a heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
There was 1,000 magicians in this audience, including David Copperfield, Siegfried and Roy, everybody. And now, so far, I've apparently killed somebody.
Yes, not a good look.
This guy finally gets up. I say, do you want to stay or go? He says he'll stay. And after that, the whole act was comedy gold, and I won it. So I won it, not particularly on my magical ability. I won it on my ability to turn a situation around in comedy. But I won it. And anyway, that night I got an email from David Copperfield, secretary, saying he would like to invite you to have a tour of his private museum with 4 other magicians who happen to be really top of the different country magicians, heroes of mine. Yeah. And a limousine came to pick us up at midnight and took us to his museum. And David Copperfield looked at me and said, I've Googled you. And we didn't have a conversation apart from that, but we had this amazing. He's really intense.
Yeah.
But the reason he's at the top of his field, he has not stopped working ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I've magically made magic happen.
But you wouldn't even create a museum, would you?
I hate museums. No, I was so bored. So I wrote. Don't tell David Copperfield this. Nobody tell David Copperfield.
Okay. Our secret. This will only be seen by 1 million people, we hope.
Maybe I better not know.
But none of them will tell David Copperfield.
It was midnight when we started this tour. We were still going around this museum, this amazing museum that he's got, the secret, at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was starving. And he was showing us these clockwork things. And all I could think about was McDonald's fries. I was thinking...
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
And that, of course, was choreographed to the nth degree, because as you got in the car, then something had changed, hadn't it, in the window or something?
But the whole thing was a show. I realised halfway through David, he's got a script. So you go in through the little shop, and the shop is, you have to read the book, but the shop is a copy of his parents' tailor shop in New York. And so if you remember Mr. Ben, it was a bit like that, where you go into the shop and then you go in here and you go in there, and he's literally performing all the way through for 4 hours. Yeah, it's his show. But not only that, David Copperfield does 280 shows a year, not this year, but he does more shows than anybody else. He is incredible.
What would be his motivation? So he's at the top of the thing. What would be your guess? Is his motivation to invite 4 of the top magicians to a midnight to 4 a.m. tour, where even the last bit, that shop window actually changes, doesn't it, kind of thing? So that you've got this immersive experience. He's had to work all the way through it. Right. What actually gets you to that point that you actually do that?
Yeah, well, he's a billionaire, so it can't be money. He loves magic and he loves performing. It's a bit like me. I mean, I could probably live very frugally to the rest of my days and never perform again. Yeah. I ain't gonna. I'm going to be performing until they put me in the ground, because I love it.
Absolutely. Okay. And the one thing that is the case between both of you, which is something I think all business owners, especially startups, really, whatever they're doing, is to realize that it's a long-term thing. If you make the decision to actually be independent, be creative, and do something, then that's the first decision that you've actually made in a long journey, really, and to treat it as such, because you've both got there aren't any shortcuts, are there? Both David Copperfield and Romany, to develop their expertise to the level you've got, an act that is actually world class, requires practice, doesn't it?
Yeah, I haven't practiced since February.
I know, but it did. It did. I mean, there's long periods of time where you're doing nothing else but practicing. You haven't got anywhere to go, have you? But you're actually practice.
It's true. But as you were speaking, I was thinking of one thing that actually I would like to pass on. Yeah, that please. I learned really early on. There was another performer, Miss Behave, who now was doing a show in Vegas, very successful. But at the time when I was a street performer, she was a street performer. I said, how can you how are you going to all these festivals? She said, keep your overheads low. That was a huge piece of advice for me. Keep your overheads low, because especially if you're doing a creative thing, I didn't earn really any profit for 10 years or so. So what I did, I got myself 3 lodges. So if you look at my books, you'd have a good income from my lodges, which enabled me to invest any profit from show business back into the business, making it better and better.
Absolutely.
That really took the pressure off. If I hadn't have had that, I wouldn't have been able to go to the director, to take 2 years off to write a book. Yeah, I wouldn't have had the artistic freedom or creative money to invest. So that was a really good idea. If you can get a passive stream of income, whether it's a tenant or a lodger or something that takes the pressure off your business.
Yeah, I mean, controversially, I totally agree with that. And controversially, I say to a lot of startups that are thinking about, getting a big loan or getting an investor and a lot of money, and I say, well, you'd actually be better to cut your costs as much as you can and get yourself a part-time job while you're starting off, so you've got some other income coming in before you can do. I think that's great advice.
I absolutely agree with you. Don't get into debt if you can. And also Elizabeth Gilbert, who's my great hero, the author, she said, and if you watch her TED Talks on YouTube, they're really good. And all her stuff is great. I like her. But she is a fantastic writer, but she said to her writing, I will never make you pay the bills. She said to her creativity, I will never make you pay the bills. And ironically, she's billions now. But so she had 3 part-time jobs.
Yes.
so that the creativity was not hampered by having to pay the bill, because I couldn't have created what I did if I had to run around doing all the maybe kids' parties or whatever.
No,
I wouldn't
absolutely.
have had time to do what I did.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of performing, do you enjoy the fact that you've got it? I mean, how is the audience size a factor in performing? I mean, you started off like many people, which is a really brave thing. God knows how you did it, which is a street performing thing.
Yeah.
And you had quite a long time with that, and the people that you sacked along the way in your life were street, were good at that as well. So, and you got to know that whole scene. So I wonder whether I suppose it's the acclaim that you actually get, whether the audience size has something to do with it. If you like, you're visualizing being a speaker now. Are you visualizing being a speaker with a large audience and people, or tell me about it. Tell me what you tell me what counts to you in actually getting the most out of your creativity and performance.
Well, I am visualizing a big audience at the moment, because it's wonderful when you've got a really big audience and the energy of that. I mean, the reason why I'm not very keen to start work at the moment is my colleagues are telling me about 150 people in a 1,000-seater audience, all spaced and with masks on. I'm like, well, that's not my idea of show business. I'd rather stay home,
Exactly.
But it's true that when you on a ship, say, which is where I've been working a lot, when you've got a full theatre, it's fantastic, the energy. However, I once had the experience, I was on a saga ship, it was a new theatre, and the theatre was a 500-seater theatre. I'd done the show, it was full, it was great. But then I had to do it again. And there weren't that many people on the ship. And I ended up with 12 people in the audience. And the manager said to me, well, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. I said to the people, do you want me to do a show? And they're like, yes. They're very old on the side. I go, yes, we do. And so I said, okay, then we got to work together. And we had a wonderful show, because I was like, I'm going to do my best for you 12 people.
Right. Yeah.
We had a great show.
Yeah.
I think it's not really the size of the audience, it's the attitude of the audience, isn't it?
Yeah.
If the audience are a bit like, well, we don't like you and we're not going to join in.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't matter how big or small they are, it's not fun.
Yeah.
From
so
small
it's
to
a positive vibe that we get from performing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about the size of it. It's not
I did a show for, I think it was 3,000 in Germany, and that was the only time I've ever done that big. And that was tricky, because you literally had to wait for the laugh to go like a wave to the back, because the sound travels.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that was, I'm sure you get used to it, but in my mind, I loved Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, where she has quite a big hall, or maybe 1,000. I like about 1,000 is quite nice.
I think one of the things that that I think is tremendously satisfying actually about the smaller audience is obviously that you're getting direct feedback from, which is to a performer is absolutely wonderful, because people used to say, when I was chief executive of Amway UK, and I speak to 15,000 people at the NEC.
Wow.
And you say, well, how could you do that? I said, well, you're not as nervous, funnily enough, because it's just so big. I'm much more nervous if I can see every face.
Like a
in the audience, and I'm actually thinking, are they going to laugh at this? So, I didn't need to worry. I just had to do the best I could, which is a good attitude in life, isn't it? To 15,000 people, you can only just do, because you don't get that feedback, which I think is so important to a performer, especially your act, because your act, there's something wrong if the audience isn't going to laugh a few times.
Exactly. But also, let me tell you, Tony, the one thing, so people see me on stage and they say, you're really confident. But what they don't see is I've spent the day in bed because I'm so scared.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But then what's interesting, when I did the show on the ships, the theatres that I used to do, you couldn't really hear the laughter. And so often I'd after the show, I'd sit in my dressing room and be like, oh, they didn't like it. They didn't laugh. Until once my husband came with me on the cruise and he came backstage and said, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, they didn't go very well. They didn't like, and he was like, come outside. So he dragged me outside, and then everyone's coming up to me. He's like, oh, we laughed so much, we were crying, and oh, we loved it, and and I was like, oh. So that meant that after he did that, I then always, after the show, immediately afterwards, walked outside in the American fashion. They do this in America, so that people could walk past me. First of all, as a British person, I felt really bad because I thought, what if they don't like me? I'm putting an enormous pressure on them to sort of, how awkward, they'd have to walk past me and go, we liked your show, when they didn't. But that didn't happen. And you can absolutely tell, because it was genuine, that people liked it, or they were laughing, or their husband was laughing, and he never usually laughs. And so you're right, that's fantastic.
Well, you see, you can do it as a magician because you're on stage, and it's important that the audience is looking at you. But my nerves are so bad, and as you know from my stuff, they've just got worse as the years go on. So I get sicker and sicker and sicker, and less sleep. And I actually did a show for a couple of years recently where I actually had the slides going on at the front of the theatre, and I'd walk around the audience actually giving the talk, so they could actually see slides, so revolving slides, not a PowerPoint presentation, revolving slides. But the reason I was doing it was for me, not for them, because I was having the direct feedback. I was in the audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because that feedback actually increases my morale and makes me perform better. And if you don't get any feedback, or you can't, as you say, hear the laughter, it can sometimes be the loneliest place in the world, can't it?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Friday, the 8th of January, 2021. Follow the hashtag MicroBizMatters.